Hey, MJ here. So, you remember Pac-Man? You pop in a coin and you'd control a giant cheese wheel looking thing where you'd gobble energy dots and run away from Technicolor ghosts. And I'll admit it, I still have a little PTSD from that game, but remember how in the corners there were those giant power dots you could grab? And those were great because that was your chance to flip the script so you could chase after the ghosts instead. Except it reminds me of the world we're living in today because we're living in a giant world of Pac-Man, except we're the ghosts and Pac-Man, well, I'd say that's inflation, hunting us down, chasing us around every corner, getting closer and closer, while we're desperately trying to stay ahead and hoping we don't stumble. But even just one false move or even a misstep, like a health emergency or a job loss, well, it'd be almost certain death. Game over, no more coins. Now, what if I told you there's a way to kind of defend against the chomping jaws of inflation? Well, there is a way because I'm going to show you a few cool tricks to sort of hack the system so you can help your retirement savings last as long as you planned it to. But to do that, I first need to explain what inflation actually is, and what it isn't, and why we're not being told the truth about it. So let's play a game of fact or fiction. All right, welcome to today's game show where we reveal the truth about inflation so you can think for yourself. Now let's get started. Is this fact or fiction? A little inflation is good and helps economic growth. So this isn't fact, but it's also not fiction. Instead, this is a situation of the what's the lesser of two evils here, because here's what we know. There's deflation, which is when things get cheaper, which sounds good, but is actually terrible because when things get cheaper, people hold off on buying anything because why would you buy it now if the price is just going to get cheaper, you know? So that's deflation, but after that is low inflation, which is when things get about 2% more expensive every year. And then there's high inflation, which is when things get way more expensive in a year, about 6% or more, which is about where we've been with the current administration in 2024. And after that is hyperinflation, which is 50% or more per month. Okay, so back to the question, is a little inflation good because it helps economic growth? Well, the answer is sort of yes, only because it's better than deflation, and it's better than mega high inflation, so it's the lesser of two evils. I mean, it's like saying you love an overcooked steak, because at least it's not tofu. All right, now let's move on to the next one. Is this fact or fiction? Inflation is caused by greedy companies raising prices. Well, let's dive in. So when costs go up, companies may raise prices. Makes sense, right? But does that mean the entirety of inflation is their fault? No, because the root cause of inflation is still based on one thing. The money supply is growing faster than economic output. Or put another way, we're printing money faster than we're producing goods. All said, this devalues the dollar. Now, does that mean some companies won't take advantage of the situation and keep raising prices and blaming it on inflation? Of course, it's possible and even likely, I think, but that's another topic for another day. Because the next item on fact or fiction is wages rise along with inflation, so it's not that bad. What a load of, because I don't know if you've paid attention to the last few years, but wages have not kept up with inflation. And while wages may increase during inflation, it rarely keeps up with the rising cost of living, right? I mean, I know I look like I'm 30 years old, but hey, I'm a little older than you think. Because I remember when I first got a job making $20 an hour. Hey, I felt rich, and I kind of was. I could buy a car, I could even get a mortgage, and I could even save for a rainy day. Nowadays, that put me under the poverty line. I'd be living off food stamps and government handouts. Not because I'd want to, but because I'd have to. Anyways, I'm getting a little sidetracked because this annoys me. But my point is this: when too much money gets printed, your dollar buys way less. And as more money gets printed, the less your dollars can buy. So your savings gets devalued over time. I mean, let's roll back the clock 30 years and say it's 1994. Imagine you somehow have $150,000 in savings. That's enough to buy a house outright in cash. I mean, sure, you have a house from the 90s that looks like a house decorated in the 90s, but at least you'll own it, right? Anyways, that same 150 grand today, that's enough to put down on a house, but you'd still have an almost $2,200 mortgage payment to deal with. Hey, I don't know about you, but I mean, I'd rather deal with cheap wood veneer and curling linoleum instead of another massive mortgage payment like that, you know? Listen, so now we're clear on what inflation is and what it isn't. How do we beat it? Well, you just give up. Just kidding. There's sort of a way, so let me show you. But here's the big idea in 4 words. You ready? You can't print gold. And that's why gold has been real money for millions of years. Okay, not millions of years, but it's definitely been used as money for at least thousands of years. And remember that whole thing about supply and demand? Well, since gold has limited supply, that's the reason it's held its buying power over time, unlike fiat currencies that get inflated away to nothing. By the way, fiat currency is a fancy way of saying money that only has value because the government says so, not because it's made of anything valuable. Sure, gold is cool because it's maintained its value over the years, which is why for some people, putting a portion of their savings into gold and silver might be the best thing they can do right now. But it's not as simple as walking into your strip mall coin shop and hoping the stranger behind the counter knows what he's doing. Because hey, there's obvious and not so obvious ways to buy gold and silver. And not all of them may be the best option for you. For example, you can buy physical gold, silver, and other precious metals, which can be coins, bars, jewelry, or you can even buy paper gold, which I know sounds like a golden Wonka ticket, but it's much more complicated than that. Because the same people who brought you mortgage-backed securities have brought you another financial instrument called a gold ETF. Now, I'm not going to explain the deep science of ETFs because you don't actually care and I don't want to explain it. But the short version is a gold ETF is like buying shares in gold, which is kind of sort of like buying shares in stocks. And what's cool is you can use them for active trading, like day trading. But the downside is you don't actually own any of the gold. Instead of it's sort of like a IOU for some gold, but here's the scary part about that. For every bit of gold they have in their vault, there's 100 people with an IOU for that same piece of gold, and, well, they're allowed to do it, which means, well, it's as close to fraud as you can get, except the banks are doing it, so, I don't know, it's somehow legal. But there's 2 things you need to know. 1, if you look in the description of this video and click that link, you can grab a free kit that shows the secrets to getting gold in your retirement, and even how to qualify for some free silver. But the second thing you need to know, even though we talked about the truth and fiction of inflation, they're still lying to you about inflation. And this video shows how. So click right there to see the story that you're not being told about inflation.